I held the door for my wife at family dinner. My feminist granddaughter yelled, "You're a sexist." The moment is burned into my memory as clearly as the sound of my granddaughter's voice cutting through the room. I was standing by the dining room door, my hand resting on the wooden handle, waiting for my wife to step inside. It was a habit so old I never thought about it. 42 years of marriage turns gestures into reflexes. She smiled at me, the same quiet smile she's given me 1,000 times before, and took a small step forward. That's when it happened. "Wow, seriously?" my granddaughter said loudly from the other end of the table. I turned my head, confused, still holding the door open. The room smelled of roasted chicken and warm bread. Plates were already set. Conversations had been flowing easily just seconds before. Now everything froze. "You're a sexist," she snapped, standing up so fast her chair scraped loudly against the floor. "Do you really think women need men to open doors for them?" The word hit me like a slap. Sexist. For a moment I thought I had misheard her. I looked around the table expecting someone to laugh, to say she was joking. No one did. My son stared down at his plate. My daughter's lips tightened. My wife stopped mid-step, her hand still inches from mine, unsure whether to move forward or back. I started, but my granddaughter was already walking toward us, her face red, her eyes sharp, filled with a kind of certainty that left no room for explanation. "This is exactly the kind of behavior we're always talking about," she said, gesturing at me as if I were a prop in a lecture. "You think you're being polite, but it's just another way of treating women like they're fragile." The room went silent, so silent I could hear the clock ticking on the wall behind us. I felt my chest tighten. Not from anger at first, but from shock. I had come to this dinner expecting nothing more than a quiet evening with family. I had ironed my shirt. I had brought a bottle of wine. I had held a door open for the woman I loved. And suddenly, I was standing trial. My wife finally moved, gently taking the door from my hand and stepping inside without looking at me. That hurt more than I expected. I let the door close behind us, the soft click echoing louder in my head than my granddaughter's accusation. "I wasn't trying to offend anyone," I said carefully, my voice lower than usual. "It's just something I've always done." "That's the problem," she replied instantly. "You've never questioned it." She sat back down, crossing her arms as if the case were already closed. Around the table, no one spoke. No one defended me. No one asked what I meant or why I did it. I suddenly felt very old. Not because of my age, but because the language being used against me felt foreign, like I had wandered into a world where my intentions no longer mattered. I looked at my wife. She was focused on her napkin, folding and unfolding it with slow, careful movements. Her silence felt heavier than the accusation itself. As I took my seat, the warmth of the family dinner evaporated. I realized this wasn't just about a door. This was about who I was being told I was, in front of the people I loved most, and how quickly a simple gesture had turned into a symbol of everything my granddaughter believed was wrong with my generation. And as the first plates were passed around, I knew this dinner was never going to be just a dinner anymore. The food was served, but no one seemed hungry anymore. Forks scraped lightly against plates. Glasses were lifted and set down without being emptied. Every sound felt amplified by the tension hanging over the table. I could feel eyes avoiding mine, as if looking at me directly might pull them into the conflict too. My granddaughter was the only one who seemed completely at ease. She sat upright, shoulders squared, as if she had just done something brave, something necessary. Every few seconds, she glanced around the table, waiting, maybe hoping, for someone to challenge her. No one did. I stared down at my plate, the steam rising from the food blurring my vision for a moment. I wasn't angry yet. Not truly. What I felt was something closer to embarrassment. A deep, sinking humiliation that spread slowly through my chest and down my arms. I had been reduced to a label in my own home. "Things like that matter," my granddaughter continued, breaking the silence as if it were hers to command. "Even if you don't realize it, especially if you don't." I looked up at her then, really looked at her. She wasn't yelling anymore, but her tone carried something sharper than volume. Certainty. The kind that doesn't listen. The kind that doesn't doubt itself for even a second. "I've spent my whole life respecting women," I said quietly. My voice sounded smaller than I wanted it to. "Including your grandmother." She smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Intent doesn't erase impact," she replied. "That's something your generation struggles to understand." That sentence landed harder than the accusation itself. Your generation. I glanced at my wife again. She kept her eyes on her plate, cutting her food into neat pieces she didn't eat. I searched her face for something. Disagreement, support, anything. I found nothing. Her silence felt like permission for the judgment to continue. My son cleared his throat as if he might say something, then stopped. My daughter shifted uncomfortably in her chair. Everyone looked trapped, like passengers on a train that had already left the station. I felt my jaw tighten. Not because I wanted to argue, but because I realized I was being lectured. Not spoken to as a grandfather, not even as a man, but as a concept, a problem to be corrected. "I wasn't asking for praise," I said, "and I wasn't trying to make a statement. I was just being myself." "That's exactly it," she shot back. "You don't see how being yourself reinforces outdated roles." The words "outdated roles" echoed in my head. I thought about the countless mornings I had made coffee before my wife woke up. The years I worked extra hours so she could stay home when the kids were young because that's what she wanted. The nights I held her hand in hospital waiting rooms. The doors I opened. The burdens we shared. The life we built side by side. None of that mattered now. Around the table, I could feel the discomfort turning into quiet agreement. Not because they believed I was wrong, but because challenging her would be harder than letting me take the blow. That realization stung the most. My granddaughter leaned back in her chair, arms crossed again as if satisfied. The conversation drifted awkwardly to other topics, but the damage was done. Every laugh sounded forced. Every comment felt hollow. I chewed my food slowly, barely tasting it, wondering how a gesture meant to show care had turned into evidence against me. I had never felt so exposed, so misunderstood, or so alone, surrounded by family. And as the dinner dragged on, one thought kept repeating in my mind, heavier with each passing minute. If this is how they see me now, when did I stop being her grandfather and start being her enemy? I kept asking myself that question long after the plates were cleared. When did I stop being her grandfather? When I finally pushed my chair back and stood up, my knees protested the way they always do now. Age announces itself in small ways first. I excused myself quietly and stepped outside onto the back porch, letting the cool evening air hit my face. The sky was already dark, the kind of deep blue that only comes after a long day. I needed the space. I needed to breathe without feeling judged. Standing there, I couldn't help but think about how far the image of me at that table was from the man I knew myself to be. I wasn't always the gray-haired figure she saw across the dinner table. I was once young, unsure, trying to understand my place in the world just like she is now. I met my wife when we were both still figuring out who we wanted to become. We didn't have slogans or labels for what we believed. We had conversations, long ones, sometimes heated, sometimes quiet, always rooted in the simple desire to build a life together. Holding doors wasn't a rule. It wasn't a role. It was affection in motion. When I held the door for her, I wasn't thinking about power or control. I was thinking about the way she squeezes my hand when she's tired, about how her steps have slowed just a little over the years, even if she hates admitting it, about how in small moments love shows itself without needing permission. But none of that translated across the table that night. To my granddaughter, I wasn't a husband showing care. I was a symbol, a relic, evidence. I heard the back door open behind me. Footsteps. My wife joined me on the porch, wrapping her cardigan tighter around herself. We stood side by side, not touching, staring out into the dark yard. "She didn't mean to hurt you," she said softly. I nodded, though the words felt hollow. Meaning not to hurt someone doesn't undo the wound. "I know," I replied. But she did. My wife sighed, a long, tired sound. She's passionate. She feels strongly about these things. I wanted to ask why that passion had room for anger but not for understanding. Why there had been space to accuse me but none to ask me why I did what I did. Instead, I stayed quiet. I had already said enough for one night. We went back inside eventually. The dinner ended not with laughter, but with polite goodbyes. My granddaughter hugged her grandmother tightly before leaving, then nodded at me, not unkindly, but distantly, as if I were someone she no longer knew how to approach. That nod followed me for days. I replayed the scene in my head again and again. Her voice, the word sexist, the silence that followed. I tried to see myself through her eyes. An older man clinging to habits that no longer fit the world she believes she's protecting. What troubled me wasn't that she disagreed with me. Disagreement is healthy. What troubled me was that there had been no curiosity, no pause, no room for nuance. I began to understand something uncomfortable. In her world, intentions are irrelevant. Context is secondary. What matters is alignment. Either you fit the framework, or you are corrected. And correction, I learned, can be merciless. I started to notice other moments I had brushed off before. The way she rolled her eyes when I stood up for my wife during conversations. The subtle comments about men of my age, the jokes that weren't quite jokes. They had all been warning signs. I just hadn't taken them seriously. I wasn't angry at her. Not yet. What I felt was grief. Grief for a relationship that no longer felt safe. Grief for a family space where one wrong gesture could turn love into accusation. Grief for the realization that being older now meant walking carefully, even around those who once climbed onto my lap without fear. That night, lying awake beside my wife, I stared at the ceiling and wondered how many more moments like that were waiting for me. How many more times I would be reduced to a stereotype before someone remembered I was human first. And deep down, a quieter fear began to form, one I hadn't felt before. What if the next conflict wouldn't just bruise my pride, but permanently fracture the family I had spent my entire life trying to hold together? The days that followed were quieter than usual. Not peaceful, just quiet in the way unresolved tension settles into a house like dust. Conversations became shorter. Laughter felt cautious, as if everyone was afraid of saying the wrong thing. My granddaughter didn't call. I didn't reach out either. Pride had nothing to do with it. I simply didn't know how to speak to her anymore without stepping on invisible landmines. I began thinking more about how she had become who she was. She wasn't born confrontational. As a child, she was curious, sharp, always asking why. I used to admire that about her. She questioned everything. How things worked, why people behaved the way they did, why traditions existed at all. Back then, her questions felt alive, open-ended. They invited conversation. Somewhere along the way, the questions turned into conclusions. I watched it happen gradually, in the way she spoke with certainty about topics she had never lived through, in how she framed disagreements as moral failures rather than differences, in how quickly she learned the language of accusation, words polished, rehearsed, ready to be deployed. She spent hours online. That was no secret. She followed accounts, read threads, watched videos that broke the world into clean categories, right and wrong, oppressor and oppressed, enlightened and outdated. It gave her clarity, purpose, and I suspect a sense of belonging she couldn't find elsewhere. I don't blame her for that. The world she's growing up in is loud, unstable, constantly telling young people they must take a stand or risk being complicit. Nuance doesn't trend well. Patience doesn't get shared. What spreads is outrage, clean, simple, emotionally satisfying. And she absorbed it. What she didn't absorb were the contradictions, the gray areas, the quiet realities of long marriages, shared sacrifices, unspoken agreements that don't fit neatly into slogans. To her, a man holding a door wasn't a husband showing care. It was a performance of dominance, a symbol stripped of context, judged in isolation. I wondered how many times she had watched videos telling her that gestures like mine were dangerous, how often she had been praised for calling things out instead of understanding them. how many virtual nods of approval she had received for being uncompromising. At the dinner table, she wasn't just speaking to me. She was speaking for an audience that wasn't there, an invisible crowd she'd learned to satisfy. And that realization hurt in a different way, because it meant our conflict wasn't personal enough to her. It was ideological. I could have been any older man in that moment, any representative of what she believed needed to be challenged. I thought about my role in all of this, about the moments I stayed silent when she made dismissive comments about men my age, about how I laughed things off instead of asking questions. Maybe I had mistaken tolerance for understanding. Maybe by avoiding discomfort, I had helped build it. But still, I couldn't accept the conclusion she had reached about me. I had raised my children to respect people, not labels, to judge character, not categories, to ask before accusing. Somewhere along the generational handoff, that message had fractured. And now, standing in my kitchen days later, rinsing a coffee mug I hadn't finished, I realized something unsettling. This wasn't just about one dinner. It was about two worldviews colliding, one shaped by lived experience, the other by inherited certainty, and neither knowing how to make room for the other. The hardest part wasn't being misunderstood. It was realizing that the person misunderstanding me believed she was doing the right thing, and felt justified in hurting me to prove it. A week after the dinner, I finally decided to stop waiting for time to fix what silence was only making worse. I invited my granddaughter to come over for coffee. She arrived in the late afternoon, sunlight spilling through the front windows as she stepped inside. She looked confident, composed, dressed the way she always is now, deliberate, intentional, as if every detail of her appearance was part of a statement. She greeted me politely, but there was a distance in her eyes that hadn't been there when she was younger. Back then, she used to run into my arms without thinking. Now, she stood upright, guarded, ready. We sat across from each other at the kitchen table, the same table where she once did homework while I made pancakes, the same table where she cried after her first heartbreak. Memory has a way of making ordinary furniture feel heavy. I poured the coffee. My hands shook slightly, though I wasn't nervous in the way people usually mean. I was bracing myself. Conversations like this don't scare you because they're loud. They scare you because they can quietly change everything. I wanted to talk about what happened, I said, keeping my voice steady. She nodded immediately. I'm glad you brought it up. That should have reassured me. Instead, it made me uneasy. I felt humiliated, I continued. Not because you disagreed with me, but because you labeled me in front of everyone without asking why I did what I did. She didn't interrupt. She listened, but her expression didn't soften. I wasn't attacking you personally, she said when I finished. I was calling out behavior. That's important. There it was again, the language. Clean, detached, impersonal. I am a person, I replied. Your grandfather, not a behavior. She exhaled slowly as if preparing herself. But that's exactly how systems work. Individuals participate in them, even if they don't intend harm. I stared at her, realizing how far apart we truly were in that moment. When I held the door for your grandmother, I said, I wasn't participating in a system. I was responding to a lifetime with one woman, a relationship you've only ever seen from the outside. That doesn't change the message it sends, she replied. To whom? I asked. You or the internet? Her eyes flickered for just a second. Not guilt, not doubt. Something closer to irritation. It sends a message to everyone, she said. That women are expected to be accommodated by men. That they need assistance. I leaned back in my chair, feeling the weight of exhaustion settle into my bones. Your grandmother doesn't feel that way, I said quietly. She doesn't have to, my granddaughter answered. Internalized beliefs are powerful. That sentence ended something inside me. I realized then that there was no version of this conversation where my lived reality could compete with her framework. My wife's feelings were secondary. My intentions were irrelevant. My history was a footnote. Everything was filtered through conclusions she had already reached long before she ever raised her voice at that dinner table. "You didn't ask her how she felt," I said. "She shouldn't have to justify it," she replied. "Oppression doesn't disappear just because someone is comfortable with it." I looked at this young woman across from me, intelligent, articulate, absolutely convinced of her moral position, and felt a wave of sadness I hadn't expected. Not anger, not frustration, sadness, because I wasn't arguing with curiosity. I was arguing with doctrine. "You know," I said slowly, "when you were little, you used to ask me why I opened doors for your grandmother. Do you remember what I told you?" She hesitated. "You said because it was polite." I said because it made her smile, I corrected gently. Because it was a way of saying, "I see you." She didn't respond. "For decades," I continued, "we've lived as equals in every way that matters. We've disagreed. We've compromised. We've carried each other through loss and illness and fear. And somehow, in your eyes, all of that collapses into a single word. Sexist." I watched her arms tighten across her chest again, the familiar defensive posture returning. "I'm not going to apologize for standing up for what I believe," she said. "I didn't ask you to," I replied. "I asked you to see me." The silence that followed was long and heavy. Outside, a car passed by. Somewhere down the street, a dog barked. Life continued, indifferent to the fracture happening at my kitchen table. Finally, she stood up. "I think this conversation is going in circles," she said. "We clearly see the world differently." She was right, but hearing it spoken out loud felt like confirmation of a loss I had been hoping to avoid. As she walked toward the door, I realized something that settled over me with unexpected clarity. I could keep trying to prove my humanity to someone who had already decided my role in her story. Or I could accept that love does not require self-erasure. And in that moment, watching my granddaughter leave without looking back, I understood that the hardest boundaries aren't drawn in anger. They're drawn in silence, when you finally stop begging to be understood. That evening, after my granddaughter left, the house felt larger than it ever had, not emptier, heavier. My wife moved quietly through the rooms, straightening things that didn't need straightening, rinsing dishes that were already clean. I sat in my chair by the window, watching the last of the daylight fade, replaying the conversation again and again. Not to argue with it, to understand what had just been lost. For the first time in my life, I felt like I had failed a family member without knowing how. I had always believed that if you stayed calm, if you listened, if you spoke honestly, understanding would eventually follow. That belief had guided me through arguments, through parenting, through marriage. But what I faced with my granddaughter wasn't misunderstanding. It was refusal, and refusal leaves no room for repair. Days passed, then weeks. Family messages came and went. Birthdays were acknowledged. Photos were shared. Everything looked normal on the surface, but something fundamental had shifted. I felt it every time my name appeared on my phone and wasn't hers. Every time a family plan was discussed with careful wording, as if my presence required disclaimers. I started pulling back. Not dramatically, not with announcements or ultimatums. Just quietly. I spoke less, I listened more, I stopped offering opinions. At family gatherings, I kept my gestures small, invisible. I sat instead of standing. I waited instead of acting. And slowly, something inside me dimmed. One afternoon, as I stood in a grocery store parking lot, I realized I was hesitating before opening my wife's car door. Not because I didn't want to, but because I was afraid. Afraid of how it would be interpreted. Afraid of being seen. That scared me more than the accusation ever had. At home, I stood there for a moment longer than usual. My wife noticed. "You okay?" she asked. I opened the door anyway. She paused before getting in, then looked at me, really looked at me, with a seriousness that caught me off guard. "Don't stop," she said quietly. "Stop what?" I asked. "Being you," she replied. We drove home in silence, but it was different from the silence at the dinner table. This one felt like it was holding something back, something waiting to be said. That night, after we went to bed, my wife finally spoke. "I've been thinking about that dinner," she said, staring at the ceiling. I turned toward her, my heart tightening. "I didn't say anything," she continued, "because I froze, not because I agreed with her." I swallowed hard. "When she called you that," my wife said, her voice trembling slightly, "I felt embarrassed. Not of you, of the moment, of how fast love turned into accusation." I said nothing. I didn't trust my voice. "When you hold doors for me," she went on, "I don't feel small. I feel seen. I feel chosen. I feel like after all these years, you still notice me." Her words landed slowly, gently, like something fragile being set back into place. "I grew up in a house where no one did that," she said, "where kindness was rare and effort was silent. You changed that for me, and I won't let anyone rewrite our story as something ugly." I felt my throat tighten. This was the conversation I hadn't known I was waiting for. "She spoke for me without asking," my wife said, and that hurt. We lay there for a long time, the space between us filled not with tension, but clarity. For the first time since the dinner, I felt grounded again, not vindicated, affirmed. The next time we saw our granddaughter, I didn't confront her. I didn't argue. I didn't explain myself. I simply lived. I held my wife's hand when she reached for mine. I stood when she stood. I opened doors when it felt natural. And when the familiar look of judgment crossed my granddaughter's face, I met it calmly, without apology, without defensiveness. That was the boundary. Not a wall, a line. I would not shrink my love to make someone else comfortable with their narrative. And for the first time, I understood something I wish I had learned earlier in life. Respect doesn't come from proving your innocence. It comes from refusing to accept a false version of yourself, even when that version is spoken by someone you love. The real surprise didn't come from my granddaughter. It came months later, on an ordinary afternoon, in the most unexpected way. We were gathered again, another family event, another carefully neutral setting. People laughed a little louder than necessary. Conversations stayed safely shallow. I had learned how to exist in these spaces now. Present, polite, contained. My granddaughter arrived late. She looked different. Not in her clothes or posture, but in her energy. Less armored, less performative. She hugged her grandmother first, then hesitated before turning to me. "Hi, Grandpa," she said. "Hi," I replied, meeting her eyes without challenge. We sat at opposite ends of the room for most of the afternoon. I didn't push, I didn't retreat. I simply remained myself, calm, observant, steady. I noticed her watching us at one point, me and my wife, not judging, studying. Later, as people began to leave and the room thinned out, she approached me quietly. "Can I talk to you?" she asked. I nodded. We stepped into the kitchen, the same place where our last conversation had fractured. The irony wasn't lost on me. History has a way of returning to the scene. "I've been thinking," she said, her voice lower than I'd ever heard it. "About what you said, about intention." I stayed silent. "I still believe what I believe," she added quickly, as if afraid to lose ground. "But I don't think I handled that dinner well." That was all she said. No apology, no confession, but it was something. "I didn't ask Grandma how she felt," she admitted. I assumed. I nodded slowly. "Assumptions are powerful things." She looked down at her hands. "I guess I'm used to seeing everything as a fight. Like if you don't call something out immediately, you're part of the problem." "And how does that make you feel?" I asked. She thought about it. Really thought. "Tired," she said. That answer told me more than anything else she could have said. "I don't need you to agree with me," I told her. "And I don't need you to abandon what matters to you. I just need you to remember that love doesn't always look the way the internet says it should." She nodded slowly this time. "I know," she said. "I think I'm still learning how to separate ideas from people." "Aren't we all?" I thought. She left shortly after that. Things didn't magically return to how they once were, but something softened. The sharp edges dulled. The silence lost its hostility. We began rebuilding not with declarations, but with restraint, respect, and space. And I learned something too. I learned that being older doesn't mean being obsolete. It means carrying a longer memory, a deeper patience, a responsibility not to harden in response to misunderstanding, but also not to erase yourself to avoid it. I still hold the door for my wife, every time. Not to make a statement, not to challenge anyone, but because after all these years, love still shows up for us in small, quiet ways. And if that makes me outdated in some eyes, I can live with that, because I know who I am. Now I want to ask you, when does calling something out cross the line into disrespect? And in your family, how do you balance standing for your beliefs without tearing the people you love apart? I'd really like to hear your thoughts in the comments. Time has a way of smoothing what it cannot erase. Months passed after that quiet conversation in the kitchen. No dramatic reconciliations, no public apologies, just small, careful moments layered on top of one another. A shared laugh here, a brief comment there. The slow rebuilding of something fragile. I noticed changes in myself too. I became more intentional. Not about what I did, but about why I did it. I stopped reacting to the world as if I needed to defend my existence. I also stopped assuming that age alone granted me moral authority. What it gave me instead was perspective, and the responsibility to use it wisely. My granddaughter and I still disagreed, often. But disagreement no longer felt like a battlefield. It felt like a conversation that might never fully resolve. And that was okay. One afternoon, as my wife and I were leaving a cafe, I reached for the door out of habit. My granddaughter was walking behind us. I hesitated for a split second, then opened it anyway. My wife smiled and stepped through. I glanced back, bracing myself. My granddaughter met my eyes. She didn't roll them. She didn't comment. She simply nodded, not in approval, not in judgment, but in acknowledgement, and that was enough. I realized then that the world doesn't change all at once. It shifts in inches, not miles, through uncomfortable conversations, through boundaries held without bitterness, through love that refuses to be reduced to slogans. I am not perfect. I never was. But I know this. Love that has lasted decades does not need to explain itself to survive. And respect, real respect, grows when we allow room for different languages of care to exist side by side. I will continue to hold doors. I will continue to listen. And I will continue to draw lines where love must be protected from being rewritten as harm. Because families don't break from disagreement alone. They break when we stop seeing each other as human before we see each other as ideas. So I'll ask you one last time, honestly, quietly. Have you ever been misunderstood by someone you love? Not because they hated you, but because they were convinced they were right? And how did you choose to respond? Tell me in the comments. There's something people don't tell you about moments like these. They don't end cleanly, even after understanding is reached. Even after tension softens and words lose their sharpest edges, a trace remains. A quiet awareness that something precious was tested and could be tested again. I carry that awareness with me now. Not as fear, but as attentiveness. At family gatherings, I watch more closely. I listen longer before speaking. I choose my words with care. Not because I'm afraid of being wrong, but because I understand how easily meaning can be stripped from intention, how quickly love can be reframed as something else entirely. Yet I refuse to live cautiously. I refuse to shrink my gestures into neutrality just to avoid misinterpretation. Love that walks on eggshells is not love, it's performance. And I've lived too long, loved too deeply to perform affection for approval. My granddaughter is still finding her way. I see it now more clearly than before. Beneath the certainty, there is confusion. Beneath the confidence, a hunger to do good in a world that constantly tells her she's responsible for fixing it. I don't envy that weight. Sometimes she still challenges me. Sometimes I still disagree. But now, when we clash, it feels less like accusation and more like friction. The kind that reminds you two people are still in the room, still trying. And my wife, she squeezes my hand more often now when we're in public. Not out of defiance, not to make a point, but as if to say, I'm here, I see you too. That's what all of this comes down to, I think. Being seen, not as a symbol, not as a representative of a generation, not as a problem to be corrected, but as a person, imperfect, aging, still capable of love in ways that may not always be fashionable but are deeply sincere. I don't know what the future holds for our family. No one does. Beliefs will keep shifting. Words will keep changing. New lines will be drawn where old ones once stood. But I do know this. If we lose the ability to recognize love when it doesn't speak our preferred language, we risk mistaking care for control, kindness for harm, and devotion for disrespect. And that would be a loss far greater than any argument at a dinner table. So I'll keep living the way I always have, with open doors, steady hands, and a heart willing to listen, but not disappear. And if you've stayed with me through this story, let me ask you something. Not as a challenge, but as an invitation. When love shows up in a way you don't immediately understand, do you try to translate it or do you judge it? I'm listening. As I grow older, I've come to accept something that once would have unsettled me. Not every misunderstanding needs to be resolved to the point of agreement. Some only need to be carried with dignity. I no longer replay the dinner in my mind the way I once did. The sharpness has dulled, replaced by something quieter. A recognition that love, especially across generations, is rarely simple. It's shaped by different fears, different pressures, different ideas about what it means to be good. My granddaughter still believes strongly in her convictions. I still believe in mine. But now, when I look at her, I don't see an enemy or a judge. I see a young woman trying to navigate a world that constantly tells her she must be vigilant, loud, unyielding, or risk being irrelevant. And I see myself reflected in that struggle, because once, in my own way, I was certain too. Certain that my way was the right way. Certain that time would prove me correct. What age has taught me isn't that I was wrong, but that certainty, when held too tightly, can blind us to the people standing right in front of us. My wife still smiles every time I hold the door for her. That smile is not political. It's not symbolic. It's not performative. It's personal. It belongs to us. And I've decided that no ideology, no matter how well-intentioned, gets to take that away or redefine it as something ugly. If there's one thing I hope my granddaughter carries forward from all of this, it's not agreement. It's restraint. The understanding that calling something out should never come at the cost of calling someone inhuman. Because families don't survive by winning arguments. They survive by choosing again and again to see the person before the position. So I'll end with this question, not just for you, but for myself as well. When you look back years from now, will you remember the beliefs you defended or the people you preserved while defending them? I'd love to hear what you think.